So I was born in Guildford. I've kind of been a Guildford born and bred all my life. The store was already fairly well established by the time I was born, so I kind of have lots of early memories of coming to Guildford on a Saturday afternoon and hanging in the store and picking up the sort of the vibe of all the musicians that you'd meet in there. My earliest memories of music, like probably a lot of people my age, would have been about going through my father's record collection. And he had a sort of fairly eclectic taste. Was a big, quite a big Steely Dan fan, so I think I had quite a mature kind of musical upbringing. And then from Steely Dan, it would go a little more jazzy. So you'd have a lot of, Weather Report, Yellow Jackets kind of stuff. So I was kind of, I was quite familiar with the names of some fairly sort of heavy hitting sort of jazz guys at a fairly young age. But he was also a big, massive fan of the Police. And I guess like most people of his age, his record collection had all the good Led Zeppelin stuff and Free and Hendrix. And so, yeah, I remember that. And then for myself, I can kind of remember probably starting secondary school and beginning to find my own music and bands. And it was like, all the big 80s bands at the time, Dire Straits, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I was a big Adam and the Ants fan. I often think in what was a relatively short window, like a 3 or 4 year window of your teens, consuming so much music from so many different genres and feeling like I was kind of into all of it. And in a way that almost now my grown-up self just goes, wow, how can you follow that much stuff? But I guess at that age, it's just, that's all you're doing, isn't it? You're just listening to and discovering as much as you can. My earliest memories of the store are one where the business was still, I think, predominantly set up to deal with the sort of professional and semi-professional musician. Everybody in the store was working in a store during the day, gigging in the evening. There wasn't really much of a sense at that time that people played guitar just for a hobby. I kind of go back to, it was a real Aladdin's cave. The stores those days weren't sort of nicely laid out and structured where things were. You just had to go in and discover stuff. And I can understand why, probably a little bit intimidating as well. But all the staff were massive characters. I think nowadays it feels like music stores tend to attract a probably slightly younger salesperson. Perhaps they've done something at college or university and they're just sort of going off on their journey. And back then it was like there were lots of like hardcore lifers that were just in music stores. And I have really fond memories of they were all a bit mad, like everyone was a bit mad. But yeah, in a way that I think probably was intimidating for people to go in. But if you could get past that, there was this fabulous, community of musicians there. With regards to famous faces, I think that's a question people who've never met me before will often go, oh, you must see loads of famous people. And I don't know that was ever really the case. I guess the famous Guildfordians or people from Surrey would have been Clapton and Genesis would have been the main ones. And we did, there were definitely stories. I've personally never met Eric Clapton, which is depressing, but I've seen pictures of him in the store just on days that I wasn't here, which is depressing. But I don't think he's ever bought, I think the last time Eric Clapton came in, he just asked for some change for the car park. It's like, he just, you get it. It's like Eric Clapton does not need to buy any, guitar related stuff for sure. The store opened in 1964. My dad had been working for a music store in London for a couple of years. He was 18 at the time. And my granddad retired from the police force. They're both drummers. And it's actually my grandmother on my father's side was from Guildford. So the family moved out of London back to Guildford and opened the store in 64. As I'm sure you can imagine, having a dad that owns a music store, I was encouraged to learn and play a variety of musical instruments. So I remember having piano lessons as a kid, clarinet lessons as a kid, none of which I really took to. By the time I wanted to play, my dad gave me a bass guitar. I'm now in my sort of teens now and perhaps starting to be a bit more into it. So I had a bass guitar for about a year that again, I just kind of got a bit bored of. And then I remember And maybe this is the catalyst. I remember saying to Dad, I think I'm just going to try guitar now, Dad. And he was just like, well, you can buy your own one now. It's just like, I'm fed up of giving you stuff. And then, a year later, you've given up. So, yeah, I had a paper round and some Saturday money coming from working in the store. And I saved up and I bought an Aria acoustic guitar for about £50 and got the bug, So I don't know. I think it's a combination of, I think the electric guitar or the guitar needed, we needed to meet each other somehow. And I think the bit about me buying it myself probably had gave me that little bit of extra determination to try and play it properly. My education was, I'm not academic. So I was pretty bright up until about 15 or 16 years old, and I passed all those exams without feeling like I was stretching myself. And then I went to college, and it was just overwhelming. I wasn't geared up to learn in that environment. So I started to just not go, but without telling my parents that I wasn't going. So there was a pretty big explosion sort of when I got to about sort of 18, 19 years old, and my sort of family found out that I wasn't actually going to any of the lessons they thought I was going to. I did have another job before working at Anderton's. I worked as believe it or not, a photocopier salesman for about 6 months to a year, dressed in a bad suit, driving a crappy car around, trying to knock on doors and sell photocopiers. I hated that. And I basically sort of begged my dad to just say, can I please just come and do something in the store? I knew I liked the guitar. I knew I liked the vibe of it. I didn't really know where I was going to go with it. And Dad, in fairness to him, said, fine. He said, I don't know what you're going to do. You're going to have to just basically clean up and make the guys cups of tea and get boxes for people and I'm just like, it's fine. I'll do anything. And I was working here on Saturdays in the sort of mid to late 80s. And then I started full time in 1989. There was no internet. We were still trying to write adverts for guitar magazines, a month before the magazine came out, which is so fruitless because whatever you put in the advert was out of date by the time the actual mag came out. There was maybe half a dozen staff that worked at Anderton's. It probably was a little bit less intense. A lot less customers would come in during the day, a lot more time to just maybe play around. It was a much more of a haggle culture. There was back then, gross margins in musical instruments were quite high, and there wasn't really any sense that you were ever actually going to sell the thing for this price. So everything, all the sales guys were quite adept at doing that sort of, bit of a haggle. I think in a nice way, the internet's kind of removed all that now. Margins are tight on absolutely everything. So by and large, the price on the product is the absolute, that's what you've got to sell it for. Otherwise you're making a loss, So, but yeah, so that was kind of fun, you really got the sense in the store. There was a little bit more cut and thrust in terms of trading. The gear seemed more simple then as well. The Fender basically made 2 guitars. You can have this Strat or this Telecaster, as opposed to, now the 46 different alternatives to each Strat or Telecaster that there is. I think there was some weirdly wonderful brands as well. Yes, there was Fender and Gibson, but there was a ton of other stuff around that, has gone by the by over the time. Amps were weird. It's really interesting watching that cycle as well of guitar players. Do you want amps? Do you want pedals? I remember pretty much when I started, if you had nobody wanted Vox AC30s or 100-watt Marshall heads or Fender Twins or anything. So you could pick this stuff up secondhand for, buttons. Everybody wanted the new solid state channel switching portable. Session was an amp brand. Session, Peavey. Who else would have been? Carlsborough. All these kind of brands. So it's really, rack gear was a thing, ART and Digitech and all, Boogie Triaxes, and if you had loads of money, that was where you went with that. Marshall JMP, all that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting watching that cycle of just, oh no, everyone wants it much simpler, and now it seems to be, now everyone's got enormous pedal boards and switching systems, and maybe in another 2 or 3 years' time we'll be saying everyone's gone back to rack. And so, but yeah, it was simpler then. During the 90s, that was when we saw a big shift in who the customer was, and it was a really big part of what enabled Anderton's to grow from this pretty small cottage industry business to now, a sort of a mainstream leisure style business. So yeah, that customer went from being the guy who actually was pro or semi-pro to just, I think, big baby boomer generation. So you have to sort of think back of those sort of post-war babies that had probably all grown up with the Beatles and the Stones in their sort of, Elvis Presley, all that kind of thing, didn't have any money to buy all the stuff they wanted to buy. So by the time we're in the 90s, that generation is going, well, I've got a bit of disposable income now. I want that guitar that Keith Richards played, or I want that drum kit that Charlie Watts, all that. So there was definitely a sense that much more general interest in musical instruments. And also as well, I think, what was good for me, because I was still relatively new at this point, so I'm not jaded by this sense of like, well, this is just how the music industry works. I was able to be quite a voice in Anderton's and to influence some of the decisions around trying to make Anderton's a bit more like the kind of shop that you would go into if you wanted to buy some clothes or just like this concept of a showroom, this idea of going, we need to range the products properly, and we need to have demonstration areas, and we need to have staff that, I remember, did I used to? I don't think I did, but the staff were all still smoking in the store when I first started. It's like no one's in a uniform, everyone's just turned up in whatever they slept in the night before, they got the fags on the go, and it's just like that was how it was. But yeah, so we were able to change and adapt, and we were very successful actually. This is, again, even before the internet, the business was probably, by the end of the 90s compared to the beginning of the 90s, it was probably 4 times the size in terms of turnover, just through that change in how we presented and who the customers were. I mean, mail order was a thing, but it would have all been over the telephones. There was no sense of email or anything like that. And it wasn't a big thing. Mail order was maybe 5% of our sales. So everything was about, you really knew who all your local competitors were, and certainly that was how you were trying to compete. You wanted people from sort of Surrey and Hampshire and maybe South London and stuff, to maybe the South Coast, to feel like it was worth driving to Guildford for the day. Different now, your competitors on the internet are from wherever they are. It could be in the other side of the world sometimes. I remember, would have been somewhere between 2005 and 2010, probably closer to 2005, we launched our first website. I remember somebody saying to us that, it's going to cost you £20,000 to do this website. And like with everyone in Anderton's kind of, wow, it's a lot of money. And it's like, really? And I'm just putting that into context now. We probably spend £20,000 on Google Shopping in a week now. It's just like, so there's not even it's like, it's astronomical numbers that get invested in e-commerce nowadays compared to then. And it was but we did it right. We had an electronic sales order management system. We plugged this sort of website into it, and I vividly remember this new screen that we had on our electronic order management system to show you web orders, and like it was like when the first one appeared, like ping, it was just like, oh my God, somebody's ordered something on the internet. I mean, bizarrely, you can't even imagine this. We actually have largely the same. Software's been updated over time, but it's the same kind of window where you see the orders in, and of course now it's just literally they're ticking in like every few seconds type thing. We probably had about 5 years trading online where there wasn't really any sense that anyone was doing it terribly different to anyone else. It was a static listing. Here's a picture of a product or 2 or 3 pictures of a product. Here's a bit of copy. Here's a price. Here's your buy now button. Boom. Let's see what we do. And I do remember in the sort of late noughties, discovering videos online. And I saw Andy from Pro Guitar Shop in the States doing his pedal demos pretty much every day. You know, I think there was a new pedal demo every day, and he would play and he would voice over kind of what the pedal was, and then there'd be this idea that, you know, you would click a button and you'd go through to the Pro Guitar Shop site and you could buy this pedal. And I'd heard some rumors coming out of the States that, you know, Pro Guitar Shop had become like the biggest Boss dealer in America off the back of doing this. And I was like, wow. And then I've discovered Rob Chapman doing his videos, and Rob was living in England. And he was the first ever, what you would nowadays call an influencer. You know, I'm not even sure that was a word then, but he was doing mainly tuition, but he would do the odd sort of gear review for brands like Orange and stuff like that. But his charisma was his angle. You know, it was like he was a good guitar player, or he is a good guitar player, but that was his charisma. And I remember his channel had 10,000 followers, and my brain was just going, how many months would it take me to see 10,000 people in Anderton's? You know, if you get 100 people a day, and that's super, super busy, you know, it's just like, and I'm like, and this guy's putting videos out, and like 10,000 people are watching it like in a week. So I was like, wow. So anyway, I just phoned him. I phoned him or I emailed him. I can't even remember which it was.
Dudes, I'm Chatters, clearly. This is Lee Anderton.
Hello.
Of Anderton's.
Yes.
And the very nice gentleman has agreed to let me come here, pillage his guitar stock on a regular basis.
We were having a really good laugh doing it. So there was a part of me going, you know, it's my favourite day of the month anyway, is the day that Rob comes up. So at least we'll have a bit of a laugh. And then this trickle sentiment started to come through, sort of anecdotal messaging that you'd see from customers saying, oh, I've just bought this XYZ from you. Love your videos, by the way. And the XYZ they just bought wasn't a product we'd featured in a video. They'd just chosen to buy it. And you're literally this light bulb moment of going, that's the connection. So it's not, we don't use YouTube as a window to go, it's not QVC, you know, it's not like here's a deal, buy it now. It's this building this trust of this wider community, and hopefully showing that we're as into the gear as you are. And then, you know, so I worked with Rob, and then, you know, the big change again, I suppose, you know, 7-8 years ago, I met Pete. Pete was working for us. Pete had a fairly amazing career as a guitar player. It was at that point that it sort of started to explode, because once Pete was on board, all of a sudden we could make content almost every day then. And again, I think it's the formula in Anderton's that we stick to is this idea of, we really want 2 presenters in every video. What has to come out is, it doesn't really matter what the gear is anymore. We're not here to try and make every single product. We're not here to shoot an advert for every single product. We're here to just show 2 friends who both have a shared interest in music, who spark off each other in terms of, you know, hopefully a bit of entertainment. And it's just, so what does this even do? Let's just, you know, don't read the manual, plug it in, let's see what happens. Because that's what you're going to do when you get it. And we very consciously said, let's not be that YouTube channel that does 3 days worth of preparation before we shoot the video and shoots the slickest, most well-informed, you know, 20 takes to get the solo right. Because I think we just sort of went, that's not really indicative of what real people are actually doing with the kit. That works, you know, it's real and it works and it doesn't feel disingenuous. And I think at its heart and its core, it's still, the best videos are still the ones where it's just 2 people go, do you know what, I really like that distortion pedal. It's you know, or whatever the product is, I really like that guitar. And they just love it, and you can tell that's hopefully how, you know, you can take away from that. That's hopefully how you'll feel if you do decide to go and buy that product. It is a big community, you know, and I kind of feel like, you know, like I say, you know, it's bizarre to think that the thick end of 50 million people a year are tuning in to watch something on Anderton's TV, which is nuts. You know, I don't know what that is as a percentage of guitar players in the world. I would imagine it's a pretty high percentage of guitar players around the world. That's probably one of those thought processes that we need to be thinking about, but it's easy to sort of just push it to another day, which is, what is next? I mean, YouTube, I think, YouTube is still pretty dominant in terms of sort of long form video content, but I don't know, you know, at some point or other, inevitably, some new video sharing platform will come along with a different spin, and that'll create a whole raft of new opportunities, because on day one, it's a level playing field. Everyone's just like, oh, here we go. So yeah, our e-commerce business now makes up about 90% of our turnover, and that probably the tipping point. You know, when did we go from a bricks and mortar retailer with a website to now to a website with a bricks and mortar showroom was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, where it sort of hit that 50-50 point and then tipped over. I think we do a bit of a disservice to the rest of the business to sort of go, yeah, it's all about YouTube. YouTube's the foot in the door. Definitely YouTube's the foot in the door. But that's not what builds your reputation. That's not what fulfills the order. That's not what keeps people coming back. Anderton's is a team of about 150 people. There's some amazing people, you know, making sure that the right products get purchased. There's some amazing people making sure that the products get shipped properly. You know, there's amazing people making sure that when something goes wrong, that they're there to sort the problems out for you. And I think without all of that, the reputation would soon be like, yeah, they might have a fun YouTube channel, but I wouldn't buy anything from them. COVID was the bizarrest 2 years. So, you know, if I think back to early 2020, when rumors of this new virus coming out of China was hitting the news, and I'm not gonna lie, I had my senior management team in an office going, how much money have we got in the bank? How many months can we survive for before we need to start laying people off? You know, it's like on the assumption that this is it, you know, COVID is this like devastating, you know, that's it. Everybody stops and, you know, all we worry about is feeding ourselves. And from, I think it was April 2020 when we went into this first lockdown, and the sales went through the roof. Online sales, I mean, bearing in mind, obviously the store couldn't open. The business doubled in size from the start of COVID to the end of COVID. The challenge for the music industry, you know, the whole music industry, not just Anderton's, when COVID finished, was everyone went, well, I suppose I better go back to work and stop buying guitars. And so, you know, you've seen this contraction then, and you know, and as we know, you know, raging inflation and overheads going up and everything. So the challenge over the last 12 months, and continues to be the challenge, is you're just waiting for it to normalize and go, so what is normal now? There is definitely a sense that the long-term effect of all the COVID lockdowns is one where more people than ever will have gone, I'm going to try and learn a musical instrument. So time will tell you as just to how many of those people continue playing once, you know, the normal pressures of life you know, are back to normal. Clearly music is this enduring, it's built into our DNA somewhere, you know, whether it was, you know, 10,000 years ago banging rhythms out on a tree or whatever, or it's nowadays putting together, composing something on a computer, you know, making a completely digital piece of music. It's in our DNA. I cannot foresee a time when humankind just goes, I don't really like music anymore. And I think all the time that happens, there will be an urge, there's a creative urge in people to sort of go, I need to find out how I'm going to make this music, you know. And what's amazing, I think, about the guitar, probably more than any other contemporary instrument, is how little it has changed. You know, it's still 6 strings on a bit of wood, and you got to learn the chords. You know, look around you, you know, find me any other technology that looks the same as it did 60 or 70 years ago. And it's like, well, there isn't really any, is there? And yet the electric guitar, or guitar in general, is just, yep, we're still here. It's largely the same as we have been. So I think it will be, there's definitely something about the guitar that what is it? It's empowering. It gives you so much inner confidence. You know, it's like there's something about the guitar that you know brings out this inner rock god in people in a good way. So yeah, I'm pretty confident that the guitar business is a permanent fixture, you know, in modern life. Kids in my own kids' school, kids that I see coming into the store, other parents that I see, the cool kids are still the ones that are in the band. You know, that yes, it's good if you can be sporty and it's good if you can be academic, but the cool kids are all the ones that play. So hopefully that doesn't change.